Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition is Ninja JaJaMaru-Kun, brought to us by Jaleco. Part of the long-running franchise that ran throughout the 90s, and even saw release as of 2013 for the Nintendo 3DS. And while this classic did not see a release for the North American NES, it did see a release for the North American Virtual Console on the Nintendo Wii in 2007. So here we go with Ninja JaJaMaru-Kun for the Famicom. This game is a very much arcade-style game, where you're playing as a titular hero who's trying to take out all these monsters. There are 4 layers, or levels, in each one of the stages, and there's a total of 8 monsters that you must defeat. In order to move on to the next stage, you have to defeat all 8 of the monsters on the level. Once you defeat a monster, they will leave behind their spirit that you can gather for some extra bonus points, though it's not something you have to do. There's an okay variety to the different enemy types that you'll have to battle, and they do a decent enough job as far as mixing and matching them, so each one of the battles ends up feeling a little bit different from the previous one that you just completed. Well, usually at least. There's only a couple of different backgrounds that you'll get to see, and after around 20 or so levels, the game starts to loop around as far as enemy combinations are concerned, though you can keep playing the game at that point in order to keep trying to get a high score. There are a few things to keep an eye out for. Like I mentioned before, when you defeat an enemy, they will drop a spirit or leave behind a spirit that will float up that you can get for bonus points. But there's also some hidden items. When you destroy the bricks by jumping and destroying them from below, allowing you to get to the upper levels, sometimes it leaves behind items. Sometimes it's a bomb, which will blow up and end up killing our character, but other times there's also some coins that will give you some bonus points, as well as the items like the extra lives and stuff like the cart, which when you have the cart, you're invincible for a period of time, allowing you to run over enemies, and any projectile they fire at you will instantly be destroyed so you don't end up dying. The other items that you're able to find are the invisible potion, which will make you invisible for a little bit of time, as well as the red ball that when gathered will speed your character up. Now you can notice at the top of the screen, as I gather these items, they stay in my inventory. When I end up gathering all 3 of these items, the red ball, the cart, and the magical invisible potion, then this ends up summoning the giant frog that you get to ride around and eat all the remaining enemies that are on screen. Once this happens, though, when you move to the next level, you lose the items that you've gathered, and you'll have to regather them in order to get that frog ability again. The monsters that you're battling in the game, as you probably notice, are pretty much standard yokai-looking monsters, or Japanese folklore monsters that you see in a lot of traditional Japanese video games. You have to defeat each one of these enemies using your shurikens. The thing is, though, some of them can't be straight up defeated by just throwing it at them. You'll have to sometimes jump on top of them, like Mario, in which case they will get squashed for a little bit of time. When they're in this squashed form, you're then able to take them out using these shurikens. It definitely takes some time to get used to kind of jumping. You have a really kind of high floating jump that while you hit ceilings, you'll immediately fall back down, but in the more open areas as you're destroying the bricks can be a little bit more difficult to actually judge where you're about to land. A lot of games in the Ninja JaJaMaru series may not have made it out of Japan, but there are a couple of ones that did end up coming here, including Maru's Mission for the Nintendo Game Boy and Ninja Taro, also for the Nintendo Game Boy. Both are interesting games, Ninja Taro the more interesting of the bunch, being an action RPG style of game, while Ninja Maru is more of just a typical action platformer. One aspect of the game that took me a bit to get used to is that you actually can be stunned by an enemy and not always necessarily killed. If you end up getting run into by an enemy or them landing on top of you, you won't die. But if you do get hit by their projectile, that's when you'll end up losing a life. Also though, when you defeat an enemy, if you also get hit at the same time the last enemy is defeated, and you're both falling off screen, if they fall a few seconds before you, it will still count as you completing the level. Due to the fact that the game has that very much arcade style to it, you don't end up having really a definitive final level that you end up seeing with a boss encounter and then getting to save the princess. Instead, it's actually handled through a bonus level. Throughout going through the stages, if you wait long enough or defeat certain enemies, certain conditions, there will be rose petals that end up falling down from the sky. If you collect enough of these will end up activating the bonus game where you face off against the boss and save the princess. And if you're able to complete this, you'll then successfully just move on to the next scene. Here I ended up having a pretty funny moment where I ended up killing an enemy at the same time he killed me, but unfortunately he doesn't fall fast enough, so we end up falling relatively the same time, and it still ends up counting as a death, but as soon as I respawn though, the level still beat. It's actually something that ends up happening quite a bit during my playthroughs, because when you're going head to head with a lot of the enemies, it's very easy to deliver a shuriken at the same time they're throwing their projectile, and if you throw them really close to one another, they can end up kind of going past one another. The shuriken will hit the enemy, and their projectile will hit you at the same time because your guys are standing so close to one another. With so many games being released and a lot of different styles, the Ninja JaJaMaru series in general was really kind of a mascot franchise for the Famicom, even though we really didn't see it in North America. A lot of the different gameplay styles, since there is a decent variety to them with different themes, is actually very similar to Sega's Alex Kidd series. Another part of the game that's very much that arcade mentality is the time limit in general. You have a relatively strict one if you're not so good at taking out the enemies, and chasing down some of them can be a bit of a pain. One thing to keep in mind is just let them walk off screen and don't really chase them. They have a better chance of actually turning around and coming back towards you, so you have an easier time of taking them out. But with the time limit itself, you also have to worry about, after enough time, the boss ends up coming alive at the top of the screen, dropping down bombs, making it a lot more difficult to finish up the stage without accidentally getting hit. Every few levels or so is when the game increases that difficulty and throws in the new enemy types, so by the time you get to a new enemy, you usually have down the last few that you've been dealing with. Not necessarily that you're super confident about fighting them, but at least you have a better idea of what's coming your way. The ogres that are introduced around here, the one-eyed cyclops-like guys, can be a bit of a pain since you do have to jump on them in order to squish them and then be able to throw that shuriken at them. You kind of have to slowly get used to landing those jumps. Also, when knocking enemies off of higher platforms and they fall down, some of them will instantly go into the squished formation, allowing you to easily hit them, while other ones will still keep bouncing around and firing projectiles quickly. So there's really no safe spots. You have to really kind of be on your toes at any point when engaging any of the monsters. As we make it farther into the levels, though, I will end up collecting the rose petals to show off the boss encounter, as well as show off the frog at least one time, which is still one of the highlights for this game. When it comes to the items that appear when you're breaking the blocks and all, these are kind of random. There's certain ones that will usually have an item located behind them or have more likely a chance, it seems like, to have an item, but still, if there is one and what item it is seems to be completely random. If you're wondering every few levels, the black screen that appears with a bunch of Japanese text on it, that's basically warning you that the levels are getting harder, that the enemies are increasing in difficulty, and that's usually when they're introducing someone new. Like we saw before the last level, we had the weird square tofu-looking guys introduced. These are by far the toughest enemy in the game. They have a really fast fire rate, so you never want to walk directly towards them. You usually want to attack from behind, or kind of like trick them by like jumping up to the platform that they're going across and then quickly do another jump so you land on them while they may be potentially running away from you. Or if they quickly turn around, you're able to land on them before getting into a firefight, because if that ends up happening, they're going to probably end up beating you unless you have a turbo controller. Another annoying factor, though, with the tofu guys is when you end up jumping on them, if you walk into them when they're in their squished form, which is very easy to do in the whole heat of the moment and landing your jumps and just trying to get towards these guys, they will instantly spring back up out of the squished mode and immediately start attacking again. So you have to be very cautious when getting close to one of these guys that you don't accidentally bump them and have them come back to life and immediately end up taking you out. We are starting near the end of new combinations as far as the enemies are concerned, though when you have these ones where you have 7 of the square guys, this is where the game becomes obviously its toughest. It's kind of tricky to chase most of them down, though a lot of the same strategy as far as the pattern of working my way up level to level is the same no matter which enemies I'm dealing with. Now, located there, you may have seen it for a brief moment, was the red ball. If I ended up grabbing that, which I didn't notice it while going through the level, I would have ended up getting the frog transformation, and that ends up speeding your character up a bit. There's also a red shuriken as well, and as long as you have 3 of the items, I think that's what counts towards getting the frog. You don't need to get all 4 of them. Now, since we are near the end, it's time to start collecting the rose petals, and basically you just have to wait for the timer to get around 80 or so seconds, and this is when the princess will end up throwing you one of the rose petals. The thing is, though, since they're kind of blowing in the breeze, they kind of move back and forth, and sometimes can be difficult to actually get to it in time before they end up going off screen. So you always have plenty of opportunity to make sure you're able to collect these rose petals to see the bonus games as many times usually as you like, but getting them sometimes can be a bit annoying since you do have to wait, and they can end up blowing off screen really easily. This also means, though, we have to keep one enemy alive, so defeat everyone else, the tougher enemies, if you have the option to do so, and then wait it out. Wait for that last moment. You may have to run around a little bit, but eventually the petal will fall and you'll be able to collect it, and once you have it, we can take out the last enemy. Now we're pretty much going to be doing the exact same thing during this level, taking out all the enemies, leaving one of them alive so that we can wait out the timer a little bit so we can grab that next rose petal. Now when you're normally playing the game, since getting the bonus level can get you a lot of extra points when you're able to complete it, you're going to want to go after maybe a bit more than what I am. Of course, I'm just trying to get through the game as quickly, as efficiently as I can. One thing that ends up happening during this level, though, is when I get the rose petal to appear, I also grab this extra life that appears. And when that happens, when I grab it, I have 4 lives, and this ends up making the frog form appear. Instead of getting all the items to make it happen, I end up grabbing that extra life, and it happens. So I think maybe getting a certain number of lives also ends up triggering this, and it doesn't count as using those items. So we make it to the next level, we also have the items we've already collected, so we're very close to getting another frog form if we find another one of those items. Now for the final kind of sets of enemies, they throw every type of enemy in the game at you at once. A couple of them are duplicates of one another, but you have to face off with all the different types. This means, though, it's actually an easier battle than the ones where you have all just the square pink guys, because you're able to take out a lot of the normal enemies by just throwing the shuriken and not having to jump on their head first. The thing is, though, of course, we end up with one guy alive. It ends up being the square guy, but we basically have to just now wait the last few moments in order for the petal to appear so that we can end up having all of them and can get that bonus game. As a fun little thing, I take out the enemy at the same time I grab the last petal, so it still ends up counting and we move on to the bonus game. Now, during the bonus round, you can only get hit once before you end up losing. The boss is throwing down fireballs that end up landing sporadically as far as the background is concerned. The bonus stage itself, there's a couple of versions of it, I think, with different levels, but you just have to hit him once. So if he's all the way up and you have no levels to jump up, you have to jump up into the air, hold up, and you'll be able to throw the shurikens upwards, being able to hit him. Once you land one hit, you'll knock him off screen and you get this little cutscene, and then you're moving on to the next scene. So you don't even skip a scene or anything like that, you just go right to the next numbered one. Now we have only 2 scenes left. It's interesting that you end up having the sets of 3, so you end up with 21 different sets of levels instead of 10, 15, or 20. But that ends up just being the case. I'm not sure though if there is an eventual end to the game, like does the levels end up eventually running out, does the number for the stages end up resetting? From the research I looked up, I wasn't able to find any. Though we do end up getting one of those cool little endings where I end up dying at the same time the last enemy does, but he falls off screen before I do, or at least close enough so that it ends up completing the stage and I don't end up losing a life. Here we go with the final scene. It's the same set of enemies that we've been dealing with for the last couple of ones, the hodgepodge of all the different types that we've dealt with throughout the game, and we just have to kind of survive here. And once we complete this, we'll move on to scene 22, which is just a rehash of scene number 2, as far as the enemy set is concerned, and this just ends up looping around over and over. While I haven't played every game in the series, there are a few ones that I have done videos for, including Maru's Mission for Game Boy, as well as a really fun Famicom one that I recommend checking out, and that's Ninja JaJaMaru-Ginga Daiseksen. There's also one for the PlayStation, which I think is Onagiri Minponcho, or something like that. I know I'm probably saying that completely wrong. It's on PS1 and Saturn. And it's very much a game of the time, with the 3D action platforming being very fast-paced, but still having a bit of the technical issues at the time, but I do recommend checking it out if you ever get a chance to. As we get into scene 22, though, as you can see, the enemies end up looping back to what they were in scene 2. And with that, guys, though, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.